You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for listening to Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, June 25th, and as always, I am your host, Adam Duxter. We've got an awesome show for you all today with a guest that I had actually considered bringing on way back months ago during Operation Metro Surge, but timing-wise then it just didn't work out. But we're really glad to have her on now because she's an embodiment about what this show, Bigger Than Belief, really is. She's someone who has strong personal convictions to her faith, but also feels a conviction to connect with people who are vastly different than she is. Najeeba Syeed's story starts overseas in Kashmir and has since crisscrossed the country and the world. She's currently the Executive Director of Interfaith at Augsburg University in Minneapolis. And what is relatable about her story is that sometimes life throws you a flat-out curveball. You could be doing everything right, everything going on the right path, and then one day, bam. It's happened to her. It's happened to me. I'll never forget the moment. I was 13 years old in 8th grade, right after Thanksgiving. My dad came home from the gym and had a massive heart attack. It was a moment where everything changed. Luckily, he survived, but I do remember that moment being a time where there's a beginning and a before part, and then there's an after part. Everything kind of shifts in that moment, and these are the moments that sit with us long after they're over. They stick with us like that did with my dad, and it serves as a potential turning point. But the real thing they do is they test our faith, and for you, maybe that is not a heart attack. Maybe that's losing a job unexpectedly. Maybe that's losing a loved one unexpectedly. For many of us, that test can just be overwhelming and it can push us away from faith. Why would a good God let bad things happen to good people? That's the question you hear people ask all the time. But for others, and honestly, this was the case for me, it could force you to lean into your faith even further, finding comfort in those moments. I think for me, when that happened, I was in 8th grade. It's a huge pivotal point, and it just is a moment I realized God's got us. God's got our family. My dad survived, and we had a second chance, really, to redefine what our relationship could be. But while you're in that moment of fear, pain, and anxiety, again, it can be overwhelming. And unfortunately, or fortunately for this conversation, that is where we caught Najeeba as she came into tape last Thursday. About 20 minutes into our talk, she got real about real life. She has something really serious going on in her life, and she was gracious enough to share it with us. It really changed the tone of the conversation, I think, and it allowed us to get really real with our conversation. I think that could serve as a message, is that if you are going through something, the best thing to do is not keep it inside, but to share it. Because once she shared, I think it really opened up our whole conversation. So you're going to want to stick through, hear what she talks about. Again, it is one of the most honest and raw moments I think we've had on this show. Hey, before we dive into this conversation with Najeeba, I'm going to say this every single Thursday when we post, but please, if you haven't given us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, please take just a second and do that right now. If you're an Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you're listening, it really only takes a second. And if everyone who is listening did that right now, we would actually rise to the top of the charts as far as where these podcasts land in the top rankings. We look at our analytics all the time. But so please, if you have a second, just give us a 5-star rating. If you've been listening to the show for a while, or if you like today's episode, please consider leaving us a review. Again, that just helps us with the algorithm. And lastly, folks, if you've been listening to this show for a while, or if this is your first episode you listened to, please share us with a friend. That is the most organic way we can grow. And of course, you can connect with me directly just by searching Adam Duxter on socials, or just by looking up Bigger Than Belief wherever you want to search it. All right, folks, we teased it enough. This is a great conversation with Najeeba Syeed. Here she is. Well, we now welcome on a very special guest, someone who I'm excited to have sitting down because this has literally been something months in the making. We were talking back in January and February, and now it's almost July. But I'm glad we have you sitting down with us. This is Najeeba Syeed. She is the inaugural El-Hibri Endowed Chair and the Executive Director of Interfaith at Augsburg University. Did I nail that title?
You did. It's the longest one.
It's good that we don't have the lower third that that we have to fit it on. But you're a professor, you're a speaker, you are a published author, you've done a ton of work. But I think the coolest thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is just your title of Peacebuilder or Peacemaker, because that is so rare to see just in society. Someone that is proud about making things peaceful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I've had a lot of different jobs. There's something about that peace building title that, I was a 17-year-old Muslim girl, and I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I wanted to go to college. And I said, who are the people of faith that are doing peace building well? And it was Quakers. So I ended up going to a Quaker college. I was born in Kashmir, which is located now in northern India, and it's a region that has one of the highest, what we call military to civilian ratios along the border. So I grew up with these stories of just generations of people dealing with all forms of violence and pain. And I really was someone who said, I want my faith to be the foundation of peace building. So I always tell people I'm a peace builder because I'm Muslim, not despite being Muslim.
What was your coming to America story? Was that really early on in your life? Or?
Yes, I came when I was 3 years old. Wow. And I think part of the promise of this country was that you have incredible diversity. This is like an experiment in the history of this world to say, let's bring together people of such deep, committed backgrounds that may not agree, and let's see what we can create together.
What was growing up like for you?
I think so. I actually grew up in southern Indiana, in people know where Bloomington is. I guess it's not technically the very tip. And for me, I talk about it as casserole hospitality. So my father was a student, and back in the 80s, there wasn't the access to the kind of meat that Muslims, similar to Jews, we have halal, they have kosher. So my dad needed someone to be able to figure out, where do I get this kind of meat? So he became somehow my bus driver, Mrs. Anderson, a southern Indiana farmer who was also, I guess, a bus driver. We were able to build a friendship with her and access going to her farm and getting the kind of meat we needed. And, those are just stories that are like organic interfaith, where it doesn't have to be a deep discussion, but there are mutual needs, respect, dignity, and care.
I'm imagining like a young kid being in an entirely new place. It's new for your family. It's new for you. You are in a place where maybe there's not a ton of people around that are exactly like you. Do you remember like those early memories of just, I know you described it a little bit, but just of what it was like to grow up in a place where it was so different maybe than what even your family was used to?
I think one of the beauties of the heartland of our country, and why I think whether it's Minnesota, Indiana, now because I teach in Minnesota, and I have to say Minnesota is better than Indiana, but, I write about this a lot in my work, is that there's such a strong sense of, in small towns or in parts of our country, people underestimate the connection that people have. So for my mom, working on her English, talking to neighbors, I remember she used to think that she didn't understand pepperoni. So she would cut hot dogs and put them on our pizza at home. Stories like that where the process of becoming American was one of exchange, dialogue, conversation, getting to know people. And I think that happens despite the narratives that try to say it doesn't happen. And I actually think it happens most in the heartland of this country and happens well.
Where does your faith story start? It might seem obvious, but But what do you remember as a kid, even just learning about faith? Was it always something where you're like, this makes sense to me, this is going to stick with me forever? Or what were some of like the formative faith moments for you as you were going through that time of life?
I think it's interesting because my father is actually a scholar, but my mom as well. But what really struck me was like the practical aspect. So my mom would say, get ready for bed. And my mom knows she turns up in all my interviews and writing, and for good or for bad. And my mom would say, so what have you done with your hands to help people? What have you done with your heart? What have you done with your legs? And by that, she meant, did you walk to help someone? Did you use your hands to care for someone? And that just really kind of stayed with me. What does it mean to be an embodied, caring person? Not just to say, so to me, faith was always not just I believe in helping my neighbor, but I have to actually show up. And I think that's more and more, if we can think about ways in which faith is about service and that service is embodied, I really do think that there are ways for us to have conversations across different traditions.
Did you think at that point at time though that your faith would take you across the country doing all these different jobs? I mean, you truly have gone from one place to the next, and it's just been difference making everywhere you go. But did you think that was going to be the case for you, or how did that all happen?
I think one of the things that I always think about my faith is that it should be broadening, it should be opening, it should create connection. So I didn't see faith as something that keeps me isolated, that keeps me at the border, far away from people. If you think about great individuals of faith, whether they're Buddha, Jesus, in our case, we, for Prophet Muhammad, meaning Muslims in terms of who we emulate, these are people who are of the people, with the people, around people. Great prophets of every tradition, they didn't go and isolate themselves. All the stories of whether it's Jesus and his apostles and Jesus and all of the different communities that he was in, whether it was Muhammad, whether it was, stories from so many traditions of Jewish prophets too. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that the fundamental faith stories were about people building community together. And that means that faith shouldn't be an operation of me trying to be all by myself. We need each other.
What about the work across faith? So because I'm picturing your story and your journey of how you got to be where you're at. When did it first become like, I have this skill or this knack to be working with people who think so differently than I do?
Yeah, I think part of it is coming from a large family. We have to share leftovers. I was training a group of teens this past week in Peacebuilding from the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And I said, what's the biggest conflict? And one of them said leftovers. So I was laughing really hard, and I thought, we can joke about it, but in many ways, I think also having an example of a mother and father that from the beginning exposed us to people of other traditions. What's really interesting is a lot of the research says we get the map for love, hate, tolerance, or whatever by the age of 6. By the age of 6, I have an opinion about whoever is different than me. So one of the things my parents challenged themselves was to say, let's ground our children in this faith, which happens to be Islam, and let's also build meaningful friendships. I think I remember going to a Hindu temple at the age of 5. We had a grandmother, Auntie Ruth. I think she's since passed away. She wasn't actually our grandmother, but she was a Christian woman that would come and take all the kids, and we would go and bake cookies at her house. And for my parents, it was, well, how do you get to know other people? So my dad is so funny. When we would have LDS or Mormon or Jehovah's Witnesses people knock on our door, he'd say, "Come on in, let's talk." So we would sit down and engage in dialogue. So he really believed that if you're grounded in your faith, approach other people of faith with care and love and not with fear.
So this isn't even something that you said down the road, I want to do this. This is literally from childhood on, what you experience. And then your whole life has just been a continuation, an extension of what you learned at a really young age.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think for so many people, there's a feeling like if I'm going to interact with someone who's different than me, like I'm a Christian, you're a Muslim, like at some point, like I'm going to have to compromise my beliefs, for us to get along. We have to find some middle grounds, right? But what has your experience been? Like, how do you stay authentic and rooted in what you believe, but then also make space for people who might believe something very different?
So I teach a class called Ethics and Practices of Care as students of every tradition. And also keep in mind, a lot of people that have no religious identity also show up at the table. And I think one of the things that's been really important for me is to return to whatever our own scripture is, our own practices, our own belief systems, and say, what does my God or divine source tell me about other people? And I think one of the things that is so surprising is very often the commandment is love thy neighbor. The commandment for instance, in the Muslim tradition is the commandment in the Muslim tradition is, for instance, Prophet Muhammad. Okay, one second.
Najeeba is also battling a cough and a cold as we're taping this. Just full disclosure, she's been a rock star so far.
Thanks.
For everyone who's listening, she came in, she's like, I think my asthma is going nuts right now.
Yes, it was activated by leaving Minnesota.
Mistake number one.
Mistake number one. Yeah. So I think, I'll just redo that part. So the commandment in the Christian tradition, for instance, love thy neighbor, or the commandment in the Muslim tradition of Prophet Muhammad saying that if you're truly a Muslim, you shouldn't be able to go to sleep comfortable if your neighbor is hungry. And in all of these categories of neighbor, it doesn't say your Christian neighbor, your Jewish neighbor, your Hindu neighbor. It says your neighbor. And that neighborliness is something that's a part of the culture of Minnesota because it's so cold, right? You have to help your neighbor out, dig them out. And more, what I think about is how do we not just show up for our people of our own tradition, but what is our obligation of care, love, and support for people that are of different backgrounds? And I don't even need to ask you. If you show up at my door and you need food, I'm not going to say, well, what do you believe in? Do you agree with me? You have a need, I have the food. My tradition says to feed you. That's what I'll do.
Has there ever been a point where you get, close to someone who's of a different faith and they say, hey, this would just be a lot easier if we believe the same thing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, one of the other things around peace building is there is no growth without conflict. Think about the friendships you've had. The best ones are the ones that survive a conflict. Think about marriages that work. They're the ones that, I remember reading a study where it says actually couples that argue, surprisingly, last longer. Or just as an example, if I go into, I work with lots of entities. If I go into let's say a school and the principal says, we don't have any conflict here. We all get along. First of all, that's impossible. But second of all, I see conflict as a manifestation of our care for each other. I have to care about you enough to be in a conflict with you. If I don't care, I'm just going to keep moving. I'm not going to have a question. I'm not going to question your beliefs or engage. So I think sometimes we get confused. We think conflict is a source of hate and fear. It may be the beginning, but I think if we keep engaging, conflict can be a vehicle of deeper understanding, growth, and maybe ultimately love, or maybe at least, hey, you go your way and I'll go my way, but let's coexist.
Have you ever seen like people who say like, man, without religion, organized religion, like there'd be no war? Like a lot of that are conflict. I mean, you even look at what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, people always blame that on like conflicting faiths, right? Or even like you look at our problems in the United States, people always say these are, if you just rid ourselves of religion, you could rid ourselves of so many problems. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, then it means if we rid ourselves of religion, we rid ourselves of the most, the most generous institutions. We know the institutions that are serving across the world and in our neighborhoods around hunger. Who shows up? Churches. Who shows up when people are dealing with issues of recovery? I mean, the process of recovery from addiction came out of a faith-based place, out of someone who is a believer. And, if we start to say, well, if we didn't have religion, think about the incredible number of systems of generosity that would disappear. Think about the people that wouldn't find community and care. So I think it's really important to tell the whole story, that yes, religion can be a source of hurt, but it can, for many people, be a source of healing.
How does this manifest across your career? Like the work you're doing right now, it's one thing to say that, right? But then you also have to like tangibly make plans to bring people together. What are some of the stuff you're doing now or you've done in your career that really is like the physical peace building, the tangible peace building, and how did it work?
I mean, I was just giving you an example. One of the things that I'm really excited about is working with younger people. Whether they're Christian, Muslim, Jewish. We had, a group of Muslim students visit. Then this summer I'm hosting a group of church kids, and to me, what's really important about that engagement is to say, you know what, in this moment, you may have examples that only tie religion to violence, or you may not have examples that you can see in our public media, in our, this is what your show is about, right? Is telling those stories. And one of the things that I think I've really learned in working, whether it's with my university students or younger people, younger than university age, is that so many of our humanitarian heroes are all dead. We don't celebrate the people that are alive, that are doing things like Mother Teresa did. I can bet you, and in fact, I know churches that have Mother Teresas in them, right? Here in Minneapolis, here in the whole state of Minnesota. Why aren't we telling those stories? Why aren't we, whether it's churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, why are those stories not being told? And they're not stories that you have to manufacture. They just have to be surfaced.
Our state has been in conflicts, it feels like, for years now. I mean, every once in a while it bubbles up and over the surface. When you came to Minnesota and you did like an itinerary check, so to speak, of like, okay, who lives here? What are the issues people have? I mean, you've lived in California, you've lived all over the country. What struck you about our state and just the way people get along, or just the differences that we have to overcome?
I mean, I think there are real differences. I think there are real challenges. And I think there's real stories that, one of the things that really struck me was the capacity for people to exist outside of the narrative that's being told about who we should be or who we are. So, for example, at Augsburg, I have colleagues that are Jewish, and the assumption would be that we were not able to support one another or even work with one another. That's like the narrative, right? The narrative out there. But what has been really profound is, in fact, it has been a very important lesson to see that as colleagues, we can care for one another, we can support one another, we can show up for each other's communities. And, it's been hard. There are communities that have been hurting. The Muslim community, my colleagues who are Jewish communities, have been in deep, deep pain. And one of the most profound lessons for me has been, even in that moment of pain, maybe I can't have a conversation yet. Maybe we're not able to get to a place of, agreement, but we can say, I see you and I see your pain and you're a human being. And that we do it from a place of our own tradition, whether we're Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I think that's been one of the pieces around Minnesota that's been important, is the authenticity of showing up from your tradition with love, care, and engagement of people of other traditions.
What happens when you do that? When you say, I see you, I see your pain.
So, I have a really personal thing that I'm going through right now, and I wasn't sure if I should talk about it, but so I'm dealing with a potential cancer diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I get the results sometime this week. I don't even think I've told my parents yet, but I'm sharing it with you because that's a moment of crisis of faith, right? That's a moment when I don't know. I've had to talk to my kids about that. Like, they're 18 and 20, but your mom is dealing with something out of left field. And we did the biopsy on Monday here in Minnesota and waiting for the results. And I share that with you because you know who showed up for me is people of other faiths. Of course, people of my own faith, but it's the messages of, Najeeba, can I bring you food? Najeeba, are you okay? Najeeba, did you make it home safe? Najeeba, can I, just those kind of profound gestures that are so simple. And, I'm obviously in my own situation dealing with this potential diagnosis, dealing with what it means to me and my family. And I'm also incredibly rich. Here, I'm not talking about financial, but to see a Jewish colleague be the one who says, do you need a drive? To see a Christian colleague say, Najeeba, you mean so much to our community here. What can we do to help you? And so I think in that moment of profound vulnerability, to see who shows up, and, we'll see what happens with that. It's an open question as of this recording. And so I just encourage us to think about moments when, it is incredibly vulnerable. Who does show up for us? And are we showing up for others in that moment of vulnerability?
Well, thank you for sharing for a while.
Yeah, I didn't know I would. I am just literally awaiting those results tomorrow. Yeah.
Tomorrow is when you find out.
Yeah. And that's a journey of faith, right? That's a journey of faith. The questioning, God, why me? The questioning of, that whole struggle. And then it's both the struggle and the incredible reliance on God. Like in the Muslim tradition, we have something called tawakkul. There was a period when my son was in and out of the hospital. He's totally fine now. But it would just be me and my son in the hospital room sometimes because of the reality of what was happening. And I began to realize holy places are not just churches and mosques. Holy places are the hospital where a mom is pleading with God. That negotiation a mother does with, please God, save my child, whatever you need, whatever I need to do. And I think about the moment I'm in, we're having a holy spiritual conversation in a podcast room. So maybe we just need to open our eyes more to not just religion, but the sacred and the holy in the moment that we're experiencing it. Because I imagine we may see a lot more goodness in people than if we just define it by the narrow confines of a religious doctrine. Who's showing up for you? Why are they showing up? Those are some of the questions that I think bring a lot of meaning in these moments.
Have you ever been through anything like this? I mean,
myself, no, I haven't. So this is meaning for me. I mentioned my son had been sick for a period, but no, I haven't. And I realized the other thing around faith, whether it's my faith or your faith, is that the vulnerability of the human condition is that we do need each other. And that, I was talking about earlier, religious communities are communities. I think we spend a lot of time on the religious part and we forget about the community. And that community piece, in fact, I was sharing a study with my students around what we call kind of spiritual health, that medical doctors have found that if people have a spiritual community, it doesn't have to be religious, could be a spiritual community grounded in a belief system or whatever practice. But if you have that kind of community, your ability to navigate the kinds of things that we've been talking about is actually much more effective. And so the doctors in the article recommended that the intake question that a doctor should have is, do you have a spiritual support community? And, it's interesting. One of the communities that I've learned that the most from are people, two things. From evangelical Christians, one of the things I learned was being able to share your story of faith. For me, that was a very private story, but from my I've taught in Christian seminaries, but learning from my evangelical students that there is a beauty to sharing that story.
Your story.
Exactly. And learning the beauty of what it means to share that story. And then actually from LDS communities, Mormon communities, the importance of community, the way that there's such a deep-knit investment in the congregation or in that community. And I share those stories because I think one way I could look at another religion is to say, I'm better than them. Or the other question can be to say, what do they have that I can learn from as a practice while being deeply grounded in my own tradition?
You mentioned like your conversations with God right now, and it's easy to be like, why me? But what are you asking God right now? I mean, one thing I always think is interesting about Islam is the necessity of praying constantly, right? There's dedicated times of the day you stop what you're doing and you pray, right? Because I think within Christianity, like my religion that I practice, it's easy. Some people will call it like just shooting up a prayer arrow throughout the day. Like, I'm just going to bling, just send it up there, right?
Oh, yeah, I want to know more about that prayer arrow.
But it's just like a quick, like, hey, God, like, if you could be with me right now, or like, God, please, I'm walking into this room. Please be with me, right? Just a quick, 2-second, throw it up there, right? Or it's like quiet time in the room, just you and God, but I'm curious for you as you're going through these daily prayers, like, what are you saying to God as you're going through this time? What do you feel like you're hearing from God? How has your faith brought you comfort in this time?
It's interesting because I think about that a lot. And one of the pieces that I think is powerful about having these kinds of experiences is building empathy for people who've had those experiences. So, like you said, I haven't had this experience, but now when someone comes to me with that story, it's a whole different kind of conversation if I've had that experience. And so what I mean to say is that I think in that relationship of prayer with God, one of the most important lessons for me is to know that I don't know everything, and to know that there is an importance to my insignificance. That one of the superpowers of belief and faith is that I have a relationship with a divine being that is going to weather me through anything. One of the ways we describe, or the ways that Prophet Muhammad, or the ways that God is described, like if I come walking to God, God comes running to me. So that intimacy of that relationship, the very daily part of it, like you said in prayer, it is a source of comfort. And it's a source of obviously questioning at times. And it's also sometimes saying, this is part of faith. I don't know the reason for this. I don't know why this is happening to me. And I'm relying on you, God, as my resource to get through it. And that's not always an easy thing to do, right? That's kind of a paradox in and of itself. And that to me is the beauty of faith, is I can't explain everything. I don't have the answer to everything. And sometimes that's okay. And sitting with the uncomfortability knowing that there's a force far greater than myself that's on my side. And that's really what gets me through these moments.
Is there a hope tomorrow that you get
good
news?
Well, it's one of those weird things where you're like, you hope for a negative result.
Yeah.
Not a positive one.
You get positive news, which would be, but I mean, there's hope at this point that could be the case.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. We just don't know. And I think I didn't expect to share that, but I think you caught me in the moment when I'm very private about things. Yeah. But I feel like maybe one of the ways we all journey more effectively with one another is to understand that the human condition can impact any of us.
Yes.
That today, the person that I saw on the side of the street that doesn't have food, who knows in the future if that could be me? The person that has an incredible position of, in a particular place, and then the next day loses their mom. Like, that's, we all are going to experience grief. By these stories, what I mean to say is that all of us are human beings, and that maybe the place to start from isn't from this question of what do I agree with, what do I disagree with, but what, I tell people, let's not look for common ground between our traditions, but let's look for common humanity.
Have we ever been more divided than we are right now? I think it's easy for people to say. I've been hearing that for years, which is funny because people said that in 2020, our nation's never been more divided, but we also literally had a civil war at one point of our nation. So I feel like it's easy to become a prisoner of the moment of things have never been worse. We've never been more divided. We've never been more isolated. But you see and you experience.
Well, we've also never been more diverse.
Yes.
You can say also we've never had a country that existed like the United States that's as diverse. And what I take hope in is listening to my students when they talk about the value of their friendship with people of other traditions. When a student who, the level of diversity we have at Augsburg is really high, religiously, ethnically, racially. And I sit with these, kids in class, and we intentionally, have really hard conversations. But what I want to say is, I don't think we have those conversations enough. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? And how do you show it in the world? I think we have become really afraid to have those conversations in a way that is inquisitive, in a way that is appreciative. So I will say, I don't actually, we're the most diverse. I think about just a coffee shop where I go to, and there is a Muslim woman sitting next to another person of a different tradition, and we're all in the space together. And that's one of the beauties of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the state of Minnesota, is that it is an alternative narrative to the one that says there is one religion, there is one history, there is one outcome. We are living examples of the fact that we can be deeply separated, and then we can also, walk into a coffee shop where someone is grabbing Somali sambusas and someone else is saying, good morning. I just, I come here. I've had these conversations. I come to this Somali coffee shop after church. These are the real conversations that are happening in the streets of our state. And I think it's an incredible example. And, I have a lot of hope. And I don't know if it's because I see these kinds of things in front of me, but I really appreciate the efforts that you're making to share these stories. Yeah. I will say, this kind of work takes courage right now.
Yeah.
It takes courage. And it's not easy. It's messy. And it's scary sometimes. Yeah. And to me, this is the vision that God had for the world. So I'm doing God's work. So are you.
It feels like we live in a culture that is rewarding outrage and is rewarding division. When you look at your algorithm, it is the things that make you angry that come to the top. And it feels like that's truly what is driving our division. But how do you break free from that when it feels like what is incentivized is the divisiveness that you see, and it's everywhere you go and everywhere you scroll, that's what you see. How do you take the first step in breaking away from that if that's literally what is being incentivized to succeed and come to the top?
So I think we didn't have much time, but I've worked with many different kinds of communities. I think we have to redefine what power means, because there is this, especially in the optics of social media, there is this sense that if someone else is in a, seems to have some position of power, that means I don't or my community won't. So it's a zero-sum game. We live in this zero-sum game kind of culture right now, where if you speak as a Christian on something, that means that me as a Muslim, I'm pushed out. And it's like, well, what does it mean to redefine power? And what does it look like where if someone else has some space, it doesn't mean it's taking it away from me? And that, I think, is a fundamental question of how we organize and build relationships as a society. Because if I see someone different having a voice as a threat to me and my existence, I don't know that we can actually get to some of the vision that we've been talking about. So it takes the work to say, just because someone else has visibility, that doesn't mean it's taking away from mine. What does it mean for me to cultivate mine and to understand that there are ways in which power can be, whether it's optically or in real time, not be a zero-sum game? And I think the fear plays on the zero-sum game. It says, hey, if that person or that group is represented, that means it's an insult to you. But why is that? Have we dug deeper and said, well, why is that an insult to me? And maybe actually, if we spend some time, we'd realize it isn't. And that there are ways in which we can share the city, share the state, share our communities that are healthy for all of us.
I appreciate your time so greatly. And I think what's really cool about you being so vulnerable and so open and so honest is I think that people can relate to what you're sharing. And I think for people to relate through that pain offers a really unique way to connect, because I think everyone has truly been in that place where they felt scared or regardless of what they believe, asking God, why me? And I think that my hope is that you share that for a reason and people can take something from that, but also, like you said, be there to support you at this time. If people want to see more of what you have to say, if they want to connect with you, how can they find you?
I think probably, I don't usually say this, but the website is najeeba.com. They can connect with me through there.
Awesome. And you're on Instagram, socials, everything like that?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, I greatly appreciate your time. I mean, going through a lot personally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I appreciate it. I think it's really cool, and I think it's going to resonate with our audience.
Well, I really, really appreciate the incredible courage you're taking, because I think the courage isn't around strength of dominating a narrative, but the courage is, let's share the narrative, let's build a narrative together. And that's the more creative choice. That's the more exciting choice. It's a lot easier to just drown everyone else out and have your own voice, whether it's a religious community or whether it's whatever type of community. So I just encourage us all to think about, what does it mean to be courageous and hear the voices that we may not want to.
Najeeba, thank you for your time. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you so much again for listening to Bigger Than Belief. And we just did want to give an update on Najeeba because we taped that last Thursday. And of course, you heard her say in that interview, her test results were coming back on Friday. The good news, and she said we're okay to share this, is that everything is looking good at this point. Those tests came back negative. She said she's actually with some family right now, just spending some quality time. So all good news on that front. She says, and we know that she appreciates the prayers that could be coming in. Hey, again, if you like this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening. Just stop what you're doing right now, please. Hit that 5 stars. It helps us way more than you know. And thank you to the more than 100 of you that have chosen to do that already. And thank you for everyone who's left a positive review as well, wherever you're listening to this episode. It really does help us a ton. Again, Bigger Than Belief, real conversations with real people about real faith. New episodes drop every single Thursday, including next Thursday, where we have an awesome guest coming your way, someone who I think you're really going to enjoy listening to because they speak to the Gen Z of it all, which is a whole new world for so many of us. That episode coming next Thursday. You won't want to miss it. But for now, folks, be well, and we'll see you very soon.
Love podcasts? Love Minnesota?
Check out the WCCO podcast studio lineup.
Hear the top stories of the day with 4 things to know.
Discover top female athletes and teams from around the state on women in sports.
Dive into stories about faith and belief from your local leaders to your neighbors next door with Bigger Than Belief.
Stay in the know on the go with the WCCO podcast studio. Go to WCCO.com/podcasts.